I was invited by Mrs. Verdi to a conference she had in Iran for women in sustainable development. And I went there to Iran. I went to the conference with her, and it was really good. We had dinner. And then suddenly, on my way back to the airport, after I finished the 2 days conference, I was going back to the airport. A car came. It was a civilian car, and civilian people went down and they took me hostage. They kidnapped me. They blindfolded me and they took me. I didn't know where or anything. They changed my clothes into blue clothes and they put me in a cell, 2x4 cell. And they told me that someone went to Beirut with my passport. So now I am kidnapped and nobody knows where I am. And I should not wait for anybody to come and ask for me.
Nizar Zakka is a Lebanese national and a US permanent resident who was arbitrarily detained by the Iranian regime. He is one of over 30 foreign or dual nationals who have suffered the same fate in the last 10 years. However, Iran has been using this type of hostage diplomacy for over 40 years, since the overthrow of the Shah and the birth of the Islamic Republic in 1979.
3 سنين و8 أشهر و24 يوم أمضيتهم بالمعتقل بعيد عن عائلتي وأصدقائي، عن شغلي، عن وطني. كنتوا أنتوا السند الحقيقي يلي خلاني قاوم الظروف والظلم والتعب واليأس والوجع والقهر.
Mr. Zakka was arrested in Iran on espionage charges and was released in 2019 after 4 years in prison. But what is hostage diplomacy and why does Iran persist in its use while the world condemns them for it? Hostage diplomacy is when a state arbitrarily detains individuals, usually with foreign ties, nationality or residency, to use for diplomatic purpose or economic gain. These individuals are arrested with false allegations and used as bargaining chips to either obtain an economic return, gain political leverage in international disputes, achieve foreign policy objectives, or to be used to swap with Iranian prisoners held in other countries. This diplomatic tool dates back to ancient Rome, where hundreds of foreign nationals were detained as part of international negotiations. Hostage diplomacy is a clear violation of international law, and yet Iran, China, Turkey, and North Korea still practice it today. Iran has been unlawfully detaining foreign and dual nationals under the pretext of protecting national security or countering spying. This action has often been justified in Iranian courts by false confessions, usually extracted under torture or threats to close family members. These confessions are then paraded on Iranian TV to show the accused as guilty.
من برداشتم این بود که خب واقعاً اروپا هستن، ولی خب خودشون مطرح می‌کردن که سیستم امنیتی اتحادیه اروپا هستیم.
ارزیابی جلالی انجام می‌شود. افسران موساد آرام آرام زمینه همکاری او را فراهم ساخته و جلالی را به سمت جاسوسی و جمع‌آوری اطلاعات از حوزه‌های مورد نظر خود هدایت.
But the reality is far from what Iran claims. This country has adopted hostage-taking as a strategy to further its foreign policy interests, revive the economy, bolster international support, and recover debt.
These dual nationals, hardly you have anyone who's very politically involved in criticizing the regime. Many of them are scholars, like myself, or academics doing some sort of research or cultural related work, or there were businessmen people who are trying to reconnect Iran to the outside world, to foster business, commercial ties for the betterment of Iranian society and then the common people. I think by arresting people like us, the regime conveys a very strong message that we do not want free cultural dialogue and communication. We think that's potentially destabilizing. We do not want to have more open, free-flowing commercial contact with the West, because that harms our interest.
But why has Iran continued to pursue a policy of hostage diplomacy? Put simply, it's because it often works in their favor. Iran has gained the return of prisoners, as witnessed recently in November 2020 with the repatriation of 3 Iranian prisoners from Thailand in exchange for the release of Australian-British academic Dr. Kylie Moore-Gilbert. Iranian media called it a prisoner swap, although this was publicly denied by Australia. Alternatively, it is also from countries paying for their nationals to be released, either in currency or goods.
The Iranian authorities have not been shy, particularly, in stating that this has been considered a kind of living ATM. It's a bank. It is a way of advancing their interest in leveraging foreign countries' policies and just getting money, just getting ransom.
This hypothesis also seems to be confirmed by former prisoners.
Well, for me, my experience was specifically with the Revolutionary Guard and the IRGC. And in fact, they do that. It's a practice. It's a business. You can tell from day one they took me, it was a business that they are doing. So now they have one person that they want to exchange with the world. They want me to say that I am American or I work with the American intelligence or something, so they can exchange me. Even though there is nothing, I have never worked with any government, with anything, but for them it's good. So let's take one more person. And they are treating us as a hostage. That's all what they do. They don't do anything else. They treat you as a hostage from day one. They even ask me, call people that you know in the US, tell them that you are here, maybe we can exchange you, maybe we can make favors and release you from day one.
It is important to know why Iran does hostage taking over and over again. I think the answer is rather simple, because it works. My interrogator told me there's nothing they can do to us. He told me so with some kind of pride. You know, you are not important. You're here just because you are American. You deserve to suffer because you are American. We want to do a deal with America to get our detainees back. My interrogators always came in the afternoon after work hours. When I was interrogated, I asked the guards why they came so late. The guards said they got overtime pay, right? So you have to understand it comes down to nitty-gritty little financial gain.
Afterwards, when I returned back to UK and I started investigating this notion of hostage taking, and I came into contact with a lot of families, it slowly started dawning on me that the individual caseworkers, karshanas as they're called, so kind of the lead caseworkers of each individual hostage, whenever they can get through someone as a criminal, as in someone not only being accused but also sentenced for that particular crime, they get a promotion. So there is a lot of fabrication undoubtedly involved because of the really awful economic situation in Iran. So people will really do whatever they can in order to get that little additional money.
This creates a dilemma. Countries seek to resolve the hostage scenario so that innocent victims such as Nizar Zakka, Xiyue Wang and Anna Diamond are given their freedom. However, the trade may also incentivize Iran to continue the practice. While those detained suffer the same deprivations, the governments that seek their release have often pursued very different tactics for securing their freedom. For example, the United States has demonstrated a willingness to negotiate with Iran for the release of their nationals and has previously engaged in prisoner swaps.
Was it a good deal? Was it a bad deal? Look, in a perfect world, obviously, we would never negotiate, we would never compromise for the release of innocent Americans. This is really not a perfect world.
It's also established a special envoy for hostage-taking. In contrast, the United Kingdom has refused to be drawn into a tit-for-tat approach and has instead pursued a policy of quiet diplomacy. Where no bargaining is done, ultimately the prisoners suffer intolerable incarceration conditions, some facing death penalty, as is the case with Swedish-Iranian academic Dr. Ahmadreza Jalali. It's important to understand that the victims of this policy are often people targeted simply for their international ties. They are not foreign nationals who've been caught in criminal acts abroad. Dr. Jalali was lured to Iran for an academic conference, while British captive Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was simply visiting a relative.
I was given a list of court-approved lawyers, and so, 8 of them still rejected my case. They considered it too risky for them, and they didn't want to get involved. But then, these are people that are in close ties with the judiciary. They have been approved precisely because they're on the same line, and it's really a travesty of justice to think that this person is there to defend you, but at the same time to uphold the interests of the court.
They didn't review really his case, and they didn't do anything, and just had a trial court for 3 hours, and during 3 hours he had 300 pages evidence and show he was innocent, but they didn't attention for his evidence.
Hostage diplomacy is not new to Iran. In 1979, 52 American diplomats were held hostage for more than a year at the US Embassy in Tehran by student militants who demanded the United States extradite the Shah to answer for his crimes. Their actions were supported by the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, who refused to meet the US negotiation team of Attorney General Ramsey Clark and Senate Intelligence Committee staff member William Miller. They'd been sent there by President Jimmy Carter to secure the hostages' release. In 1979, the hostage crisis exacerbated the already tense diplomatic relations between Iran and the US, as well as the West.
So I think it would be good to kind of not limit this hostage policy to Rouhani only, because it didn't start with him. When Lebanon was going through the Lebanese civil war, and Iranian proxies such as Hezbollah took over 100 foreign nationals as hostage in there. So I think particularly when it comes to the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, I think hostage taking is like a foundational component of who they are and what they plan to do, and how they plan and orchestrate their communication and dialogue with foreign governments.
Since its inception, the Islamic Republic of Iran has remained isolated from the international community. A devastating war with Iraq, a schism with the Gulf states, crippling US and global sanctions, and internal political power plays have left the Iranian economy in tatters. In November 2020, the inflation rate increased to 46.4%. The fragility of Iran's economy has strongly contributed to the adoption of the hostage-taking as a profitable strategy to raise much-needed hard currency. In 2018, the US, under the presidency of Donald Trump, withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. It was designed to curb Iran's nuclear aspirations and launched its toughest sanctions to force Iran into surrendering any nuclear capacity. The sanctions not only crippled a weak Iranian economy, but have had a terrible impact on the Iranian people. Poverty, scarcity of medicines and essential goods, wages going unpaid, and a chronic rise in unemployment led to mass demonstrations in 2019, which were brutally put down. Then along came the coronavirus to decimate a weakened population even further.
Iran is a sort of reeling from the impact of maximum pressure, which is the United States' sanctions-based policy that is targeting Iranian trade and in many industries, almost all of Iran's export industries. It's also limiting Iran's ability to financially transact with the international banking system. It's maximum pressure has also targeted Iranian policymakers and members of the private sector as well. The Iranian government has not been able to export oil revenue, receive oil revenue in the way that it normally was in the past, so it has less access to financial reserves and less liquidity. The entire country really is experiencing a second or third wave of COVID-19.
The UK is now the country with the highest number of citizens or residents unlawfully detained by the Iranian regime. 6 hostages are being used as bargaining chips. Engineer Anousheh Ashuri, charity worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, environmentalist Morad Tabaz, British Council employee Aras Amiri, lawyer Shahram Shirkahani, and academic Kamil Ahmadi.
I can assure the House that the safety and good treatment of all dual British nationals in detention in Iran remains a top priority for the UK government, and we will continue to lobby at all levels for the immediate and permanent release of all dual British nationals in arbitrary detention so that they can return home.
My constituent, Mr. Anoush Ashuri, was captured some 3 years ago while visiting his sick mother in Tehran, and since been held in prison under really brutal conditions, which has included solitary confinement and physical torture. Does my honourable friend agree that the British citizens, like Mr Ashuri, who are subject to unjust trial, are being held as hostages due to their dual nationality, and the UK government must acknowledge them as such?
We're fed up with the Foreign Office's, lack of action, lack of success, with the lies they've been telling us, with their general incompetence in even managing to get temporary release for my husband. I mean, the Iranians have announced that they've released 80,000 prisoners. And my husband told me that I think at least 12 people who are in his prison wing, all of whom are security prisoners, at least 12 or 13 have been released. So they are doing this. But the fact that they are actually holding back on my husband and several other dual nationals who are in there, it just shows that they are almost deliberately going in the face of the UK government and the Europeans. And we just find this unacceptable. And the Foreign Office keeps telling us that they're doing their best, but I don't really trust them anymore, to be honest, from now on, because even until yesterday, we were under the impression that they were trying very hard to free all UK dual nationals, including my husband and Mrs. Ratcliffe. But yesterday, after Mrs. Ratcliffe was, she was temporarily released, they contacted me and they told me that they had no idea this would happen, which was, I think it was a really poorly handled lie by the Foreign Office, because they did know. They've been involved in talks. It's just that they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it for both of them, at least not yet anyway.
Should anything happen to the British citizens imprisoned in Iran, I hold you, Mr. Boris Johnson, personally responsible for your inaction, and their blood will also be on your hands, and such an extreme incompetence will be registered as a dark point in the history of the United Kingdom. So please wake up and do something before it is too late.
In 1979, the UK reneged on an order to deliver a consignment of chieftain tanks that had been paid for while the Shah was still in power. The UK order was worth approximately £400 million. The tanks are now obsolete, but the debt is something that Iran wishes to be returned. Despite both sides officially denying any links between the debt and the continued detention of British nationals, behind closed doors it is generally accepted that the two issues are intrinsically linked. The Foreign Office has attempted to find ways to repay this debt, but has been blocked by the Ministry of Defence, who fear the money will be used by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard to fund proxy wars such as the support of the Houthi militia in Yemen, and ultimately lead to human rights abuses.
I know the government has continuously denied the link between the debt that we owe Iran and Nazanin's imprisonment. But burying our heads in the sand is costing my constituent her life. This is my 6th urgent question about Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe in this House, and I sincerely hope it is the last one that I'll be asking.
We do not dispute that there is a debt. We continue to explore options to resolve this 40-year-old debt. He will understand that I am unable, I will not comment further because this is an ongoing situation. But he is also right to raise the plight of the other British dual nationals in detention in Iran, and we make the case strongly and regularly for the permanent release, not just on furlough, but the full permanent release of all British dual nationals.
In a recent report by the House of Commons, Charlie Loudon from the Redress NGO underlined that available evidence gives a clear indication that the UK's method has not worked so far, and that the UK needs to rethink its approach and work with other countries to better address Iranian hostage-taking. In December 2019, the UK Foreign Office released the McGregor Review of Complex Consular Cases. The recommendations from the report included the establishment of a task force, defining the parameters of ministerial involvement, and establishing how quickly cases get escalated to the ministerial level, as well as the relationship with families of detainees, which was described as secretive, inflexible, and more intent on containing an issue politically than agreeing a strategy to resolve it.
The US, supposedly the most hostile country to Iran, is one of the most active and most willing to negotiate with Iran over political prisoners. Ironically, the UK is one of the least. I mean, the UK actually led a movement, I think it was either the G8 or G20, to try and get nation states to say that they would not respond to hostage taking because they were trying to generate a sense of solidarity amongst countries that you should resist this as a point of principle. And in the end, they got a few countries to sign up, but some of those countries that signed up also went on to continue to negotiate hostage deals.
The policy of maximum pressure has not yet yielded results and may not do, because the policy of maximum pressure confirms to the Iranians how they are seen by others and makes the leadership more determined to carry on in its own way. The question is whether you can move to a negotiating position which indicates to Iran not only will it suffer materially if it cannot get engaged with the rest of the world on a reasonable prospectus, but also give it some sense of advantage if it actually does. And I think the problem of the maximum pressure policy at the moment is it doesn't do that. It emphasizes all the pressure, but it doesn't emphasize the way out. On the other hand, those who have searched for another way out and look for opportunities for Iran to behave differently don't get much encouragement to do that. So we are in a stalemate.
So how should countries address the use of hostage diplomacy? So far, whatever the approach, governments have largely struggled to secure the release of their nationals. One barrier is the fact that Iran does not recognise dual citizenship, which limits states and their abilities to provide consular assistance to their detained nationals. Another is the limitations of the International Convention Against Taking of Hostages, signed by the UN General Assembly in 1979, which does not include state actors within the definition of hostage taking. Among the recommendations outlined by the international experts to tackle hostage taking and secure the release of the prisoners are the following. Firstly, that the European Union, of whom the majority of detained dual nationals or residents have ties, should negotiate as a bloc and have a dedicated department to conduct said negotiations.
Maybe the EU should come together and do something about it, right? Maybe because now UK is outside of EU, maybe UK should work with the United States or the EU.
Secondly, that the United Nations should commission a special rapporteur investigation into the practice of hostage diplomacy worldwide. Thirdly, that countries with Magnitsky sanctioning powers, as well as the European Union, should increasingly target those individuals directly perpetrating and benefiting from hostage diplomacy.
Really, really pains me that I see, and I know these people, some of them, that the family members of these IRGC officers, not necessarily those involved in my arrest or the arrest of others, but people who actively work with IRGC in Iran, they continue to live lavish lives in London. They continue to educate themselves in British institutions, educational institutions, and some of them actually former officers. Some of the former IRGC officers are offered professorships, and they come in and teach us about law and order and Islam and politics of the region.
And finally, a new deal needs to be drawn up so that human rights considerations and the release of all dual nationals should form part of this agreement.
The Americans, when they negotiated the JCPOA at the outset, always decided it should be a discrete issue about preventing Iran getting a nuclear bomb, and that it shouldn't go into wider issues. The Americans then said we need a broader JCPOA, which looks at what was described as Iran's malign behavior in the region. There has been a moment when, and it's been very rare, when the E3, which is France, Germany, and the UK, individually called in the Iranian ambassador from their country to reproach them about human rights within Iran. They did that about a month ago, and I think that's the first time they've done a collective démarche like that, so maybe more of that.
In this high-stakes game of hostage diplomacy, Iran has already stacked its deck for the next group of players. First round to play out is the nuclear gambit. The Iran nuclear deal in 2015 placed a limit of 3.67% on the purity to which Iran can enrich uranium. The United States pulled out in 2018. The UN Atomic Energy Agency is rightly concerned that in terms of time and action, it's not such a huge leap to reach the 90% purity needed for weapons-grade material. As the new United States Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, takes up his position, Iranian President Rouhani indicated Iran would be willing to rejoin the nuclear deal if the US was bound to it in perpetuity and sanctions ceased. Stabilizing the region through a return to the nuclear deal would give some space to rebuild a diplomatic dialogue, but time may be running out for a solution. The Iranian elections are scheduled for June 2021. An emboldened leadership may use the hostages in custody to leverage more benefit as they crack down harder on the Iranian people to stop any dissent. If this is the case, then the international diplomacy route may be closed until further notice. As James cleverly noted, the future relationship between the UK and Iran, and between Iran and its regional partners, is ultimately in the gift of the leadership in Tehran to make that happen. I urge them in the strongest terms to take the actions to do so. However, passing the baton over to Iran may not free the Iranian hostages held today. It is up to the international community to come together to make that happen.